On a cold February night, a mother and her daughter get ready to leave England quietly and seek refuge in France. The father and husband will not be embarking on the ferry. He doesn't know when he will see his daughter Bethany again.
See you later. We love you too.
Jane is accompanying her daughter into her exile in France. Bethany is fleeing the British social services. 3 weeks ago, the administration threatened to take her first child away from her at birth, right at the maternity clinic.
Good, I'm good. I don't want to go back to Great Britain. It's not safe there. No. Well, social services were going to take my baby, so this was the only choice I had, to be a mother. Well, hopefully my life in France will be happy, just happy. Happy and peaceful.
Go to sleep, baby. Go to sleep.
Beating, heart's beating. Oh, I just can't wait to get there now.
Bethany is 8 months pregnant. Before she has even had her baby, social services have declared the 22-year-old single mother unfit to be a parent.
They decide, that's it, we're taking your baby. They give you no explanation. They just come in and say, we're taking your baby, we're putting the baby into foster care because we've got issues of possible abuse, possible harm in the future.
Bethany is the youngest of 3 siblings. The eldest, her sister Becky, committed suicide 6 years ago, leaving behind a newborn baby. Since the tragedy, social services have been going after all the women in the family. When the second sister, Jodie, gave birth, her first child was ripped from her at the maternity. When Bethany became pregnant, social services declared that she too posed a threat to her future baby.
They want to take her baby away now because they say that she's an alcoholic. Because when her sister died, she drank. She was 16. She's now 22. So, six years ago, she had a drink.
They posted a letter through my door saying, this is your last chance before... My last chance? They didn't even give me a first warning or a second warning. They said, this is your last chance before we take your unborn baby at birth. And then they gave me 5 days to get a solicitor. In 5 days. What person can do that? So it was pretty much decided then.
Like Bethany, hundreds of women have already fled the UK to avoid losing their children. Those who didn't take the social services threat seriously ended up losing them for good. Upon their arrival in Normandy, Bethany and Jane are welcomed by Jenna, an Englishwoman who has been living on the continent for several years. Jenna fled the UK after social services took this single mother's first 3 children away from her.
Hi, you all right?
How was your journey?
Stressful.
Hello, lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's so nice of you. Thank you. This is the last bit of the hard bit, yes? Things get better from here.
Jenna and Bethany met on Facebook a few weeks ago.
Because you're busy.
Jenna helps future mums who want to escape social services' arbitrary judgments.
They have to prove that they're not mentally disabled or too physically disabled to be able to take care of a child. So people like me have to make an informed decision to say whether we feel that they could do this. Also, they have to prove their resources to be able to afford their rent, to be able to afford their bills, to be able to manage abroad, and also to have the confidence to be able to learn a new language and start a new life, because it's a choice for life.
Thank you. Did you get the post for Mummy? Thank you very much.
Jenna sought refuge near the city of Nantes, where she started a new family with her new partner.
Hello.
In France, both of their children are safe from the British authorities. In the last 4 years, Jenna has already taken in over 40 families.
Just to make sure you've got everything that you need, sweetheart. If you need to borrow anything, I can loan you anything that you need. And
Thank you so much, Jenna. Thank you. You're a lifesaver.
did you sleep okay?
Like a baby. Slept like a log.
There is one man that Jenna can count on to help all these women. The man who started this solidarity network. A former elected politician from Kent, Ian Josephs made his fortune on the French Riviera, where he has been living for the past 40 years. He has offered financial support to 100 or so future mums so they could leave the UK.
I helped Gina escape to France because they'd taken 3 of her children already, and when she was pregnant again, and she said, we've done nothing, you know. So I helped her and her husband escape, and she was grateful and said, can I do anything? You know, I said, yes, you can help other mothers who escape. I've never refused a pregnant woman, providing she can give me a letter to prove that she is pregnant, give me a letter from the social services threatening to take her children, showing that she's escaping from something, not just going on holiday. They have to phone me from Ireland or France or wherever and say, well, here I am, and you've got the letters, and here's my bank account, and I'll send it to them. I've helped parents whose children were taken from them by social services when they committed no crime, punishment without crime.
Why do future mothers, innocent families, lose the right to raise their children without having committed the slightest abuse? Is something rotten in the United Kingdom? The answer can be found in a piece of legislation that has had outrageous consequences: the 1989 Children Act. It grants social workers full powers, all in the name of child protection. It contains a legal concept that seems inconceivable in legislation: the likelihood of future harm. These terms are actually laid down as such. They anticipate a child's future suffering.
I've been a social worker since 1977 when I qualified, and I've worked as a social worker and a manager for 40 years nearly. There's been a process that's gone on where child protection became the be-all, everything in children and families work. So we moved really from supporting families, from wanting, from working positively, we moved from that to very much a risk situation.
Over the years, this notion of risk has licensed all kinds of suspicions of future harm: psychological, physical, and even emotional. The 1989 Children Act is the brainchild of a government that made innocent people guilty. Everything began in 1979. After years of Labour governance, England placed its political fate in the hands of the Conservative Party and its iconic leader, Margaret Thatcher. Thatcher, who came from a middle-class background, wanted to impose her own personal success on the entire population, a path which left no room for the weak.
A bill to privatise the National Freight Corporation, a bill to privatise bus companies, a bill to privatise cable and wireless, and a bill to privatise the British Steel Corporation.
Margaret Thatcher mistreated the British people and broke the social protection system. The UK abandoned its poorest citizens and turned them into suspects.
My name's Colin Racy. I'm 34 years old. I was born in Norwich. I've always had a happy upbringing. I may have not lived with my mum, may have not known my original dad. I lived with my nan, but it was normal to me. I loved every second of it.
Colin depends on benefits. He lives below the poverty level. He receives every month £870, which he shares with his partner, Claire, who suffers from epilepsy.
I'm Claire Fox, I'm 24. I went into foster care when I was 12. I've been in 3 different foster basements. Then I moved into the hostel when I was 21. Well, the first meeting we didn't know what to say to each other, and then from there it went talking and talking, then we ended up with each other. Yeah.
This picture of their first child is already just a memory. A little girl who came into the world 5 months ago and whom social services took away from her parents 3 days after birth.
Obviously, when we found out Claire was pregnant, it was 3 months into the pregnancy, so we got up to the doctors, got a finalised reading to make sure she was pregnant, and she was. And we got a midwife appointment. It was just to see how Claire was doing, how baby was growing.
During these routine checks, Cambridgeshire Social Services launched an investigation into their past, their lifestyle, and their income. And as provided by the Children Act, they evaluated the risk of future harm. Potential risk of physical harm. Potential risk of emotional harm. Potential risk of neglect. During the 5th month of pregnancy, social services concluded that Colin and Claire were seemingly unfit to be good parents.
We was told then that we will lose our daughter as soon as she comes along. They see Claire as an easy target.
Suspicion falls is on poorer parents, parents who have to turn to services or are brought to the attention of the authorities and for some reason, because of need, mainly because of need. But we now turn need into risk.
Three o'clock in the morning, Claire gets some stomach pains. It's arrival of our little baby daughter coming. An hour later, she's in hospital. But on the way to hospital, Claire did say to the paramedic, "Please, may I take my epilepsy tablets?" Now, he said no.
While giving birth, Claire suffered an epileptic fit that left her exhausted. She was incapable of caring for her baby, and this was enough to disqualify her entirely in the eyes of social services.
She was cute when I saw her, when Colin held her. I was thinking to myself, wow, that little girl just came out of me. £7 11 ounces.
£7 11 ounces, yeah. 3 days after we've sort of settled in, bonding with her and that, I go to hospital. The solicitor turns up with some papers. It's an interim order, care order for our daughter. And along pops the social worker. And all of a sudden we had to put her in a car seat and the social worker said, if you kick off, the police are ready here to arrest you. And we had to watch our daughter get carried out of hospital with the social workers.
Quite often we hear this will tackle the cycle of poverty. These interventions which make sure that children are removed before harm is caused. What's actually happening is that the poor are being blamed for their own poverty. It's actually saying if only their parents were more enlightened, they would make different choices. These children would have different experiences and they wouldn't be poor.
Now, Colin and Claire are waiting to see whether or not the court will allow them to get their child back. In Great Britain, expecting parents are not the only ones threatened by the Children Act. Established families also get unjustly torn apart in a matter of days. Nikki and Mark's life changed forever in October 2003. Their son of 18 months was showing bizarre symptoms that prompted them to take him to hospital.
On the 30th of October 2003, we took him to Norwich Hospital. They x-rayed him, they did blood tests and all sorts of things. It was the next day that the nightmare started. We got ushered into a side room to be told that they'd had somebody look at our son's x-rays and they'd found an unusual fracture in his ankle.
It's the worst, the parent's worst nightmare is to be in hospital with a sick child and social services actually come walking in and say, we'd like to speak to you at the side.
Social workers said that our son had what they called non-accidental injuries. In other words, someone had inflicted them on him by pulling and twisting.
So we are actually looking at each other now, putting a strain on our relationship, thinking, hang on a minute, have you hurt this child?
When the suspicions were raised against them, Nikki and Mark had been married for 3 years. The quiet, law-abiding couple lived in a residential part of Cromer on the east coast of England. They were raising 3 children, their eldest daughter, aged 3, their 3-month-old baby, whom Nikki was still breastfeeding, and their little boy of 18 months, who was examined at the hospital.
So they said to us, do you have any explanations? Well, we didn't know what was going on. We knew he was ill. We'd brought him to hospital. And Nikki just mentioned that we do have brittle bones in the family.
And they immediately dismissed it.
Without looking any further, Norfolk County Social Services accused Nikki and Mark of having beaten their son. Their 3 children were immediately placed in foster care. Nikki and Mark didn't even get a chance to explain themselves. Unable to prove their innocence, they returned home alone, a mere 3 weeks after their trip to the hospital.
When you come home, you sit here and you're sitting here in silence with the noise that you would have with 2 children and a baby crying and a family home, a basic family home that you'd expect. It was just silence. It's not the best feeling in the world to notice that your children aren't there.
What surprised me the most was when they took our baby. He was only 3 months. They didn't ask how often he was fed or how much he was fed. At the time, I was still breastfeeding, so obviously I had to stop that. That's got to be one of the worst aches I think I ever had, was as soon as I stopped feeding him. The milk was still there, and I was made even more aware of the fact that he wasn't here, along with the other 2. It was just so eerily quiet. I don't know how we got through them days, to be honest.
The stroke of fate that hit Nikki and Mark's family was no accident. The British authorities had started using the risk of future harm much more frequently after an awful news story shook the entire country 2 years before.
Good afternoon. After one of the worst cases of child cruelty to come before a British court, a couple from North London have both been convicted of murder. 8-year-old Anna Clambier died of hypothermia after suffering at the hands of her great-aunt, Marie-Thérèse Couot, and her boyfriend Carl Manning.
This little girl's family had been under close scrutiny from social workers for years, who now had to examine their conscience.
We're facing a national crisis, really. We are investing huge sums of money, huge time and energy in running child protection systems that don't seem to be achieving what we set up.
My feeling was at that time that London was under enormous pressure, social services, and there was this constant change and churn going on of senior managers. You would go into work in Haringey and find somebody their office had been packed up and they were told that this is, here's your cases, here's your things, we don't know where you're going, but somebody else is in your office.
It was chaos in the social services. The public servants were subjected to more pressure than ever before. On the ground, they had to do everything they could to track down abusive parents and find reasons for taking their children away. The system quickly derailed and the number of iniquitous cases grew exponentially. It is in this context that Jackie and John lost their 2 boys over a mere bump on their baby's temple.
Nothing got questioned, it was just straight out, child abuse. This is what's happened, he's got a skull fracture, got bleeding on the brain.
You go there looking for help, and they turn around and point a finger and say, you're a child abuser. It just made no sense whatsoever.
3 weeks after being examined in the emergency room, both of Jackie and John's children were placed in foster care. The parents were held by the county police for questioning.
Police are upstairs, they're taking photographs in my son's bedroom, they're taking photographs of everything, they're interviewing us in the house. And just before they leave, they're having a cup of coffee with the 2 of us. The constable says to us, now that we've been here, we've examined your house and we've met with you, we can't understand why this is going on.
1 month later, the county police sent Jackie and John the report of their investigation and their conclusions. David Gale is a former policeman who supports them in their battle to clear their name.
The thing that strikes you are the last 3 lines of it, and that is, I've received the advice back from the Crown Prosecution Service, and the advice is that all suspects should be released, no further action. I mean, that's fairly unequivocal. To some extent, there has been pressure on social workers to avoid error, and sometimes they err on the side of safety and ignore the evidence whilst they're doing it. There's almost a default position now which is shifted from objective to let's make sure that we're not blamed for anything. Social services are more powerful than the police decision. If you have an expert witness or a social worker on the stand in the family court, they will trump police evidence every time.
Where the police need evidence, social services mainly need results. Since the 1989 Children Act, evaluations for suspected abuse have increased by 302%, while proven cases of abuse have decreased by half. The judicial system only has 26 weeks to control the social services' excessive zeal.
Basically, these cases must be done in 26 weeks. And that is a very tight timetable. Before you get to consider adoption, you've got a preliminary decision to make. Should this child be taken into care? And the 26 weeks refers to the start of the proceedings by the public authority to take the child into care and the conclusion of that case.
You've only got 6 months to then make all the inquiries, to do all the necessary work, to maybe attempt rehabilitation, even to get a proper service for a parent.
During these 6 months, Colin and Claire had to take parenting classes. A sort of exam to win the right to get their child back.
We was put on a parenting course. There was just taking notes, talking about how kids react, how newborns react, how to know when they're hungry, how to know when they're tired, how to know when they need a nappy change, how to know when they're ill. Me and Claire was the only ones there who got made to go without our daughter because she was taken into care.
In spite of these Kafkaesque circumstances, Colin and Claire were awarded their Good Parenting Certificate.
We're going to Huntington to see our daughter. Hillrise Contact Centre. Stay there for 2 hours, hopefully have some fun with our daughter.
Colin and Claire are still on trial. They have been making this trip 3 times a week for the past 6 months. They have 3 meetings a week at a family mediation centre, a neutral place where they attempt to make up for lost time with their daughter, under the supervision of a social worker. During these contacts, all of their actions and gestures are recorded in official reports, recorded minute by minute. Nothing is omitted. To fight for the custody of their baby, they have to endure this kind of inquisition. It is now late April, and they are meeting with their daughter for the last time before the court determines their fate.
Are you clever? Are you clever? Yeah, I see you. I see you. I do. Hello. We did build a relationship up with her. We tried so hard for ourselves to build a relationship up with her, and we've done it. We just want to get the chance to be a mum and dad to her, you know. Even the criminal courts go proven until, you know, innocent until proven guilty. Well, we've been proven guilty when we haven't even had our child. You know, I don't really know what else to say about that one. It just makes me so angry. The court system in this world, in this country, is absolutely diabolical. When we go to court, I don't know whether we're going to get one more visit or she just goes straight away. We don't know what's happening until we get in that courtroom and they say that they're in control of our daughter's life, not us. It's them.
In 3 days, Colin and Claire will face their judges.
The child has become, or is becoming, almost a property of the state, and the state has created outcomes which they want the child to, you know, achieve, and that the parents must either ensure or get off the, you know, get out of the way.
How do you endure such a draconian process? During this 6-month period waiting for the final sentence, Nikki and Mark were tempted to breach the law.
It would have been easy it would have been very easy to kidnap them. Even though you could see there was no light at the end of the tunnel, we wanted to try and do this the proper way and try and work with social services. There was one day it was very close. I nearly thought about just getting them and going.
Would have been easy to just put them in the car and just drive. But where would we have gone? We weren't allowed to say anything to anybody. If anyone asked us where our children were, we had to lie. You know, they didn't even want us to tell our families what had happened with the children.
I made upon myself that everybody was going to know everything about what was happening. And plus, we were being accused of something that we hadn't done. So why should I lie? Why should I have to lie to my family and friends when I'd done nothing wrong?
Our daughter was nearly 4. I think the worst thing was the day that she said to us, "Why can't I come home? Is it because I've been naughty?" You know, she thought somehow, even at her age, that it was her fault that they were there. She said to the foster carer, "Why do we have to live here?" And the foster carer told her, "It's because Mummy and Daddy hurt your little brother."
At the end of the 6-month period, Nikki and Mark were declared responsible for their son's fractures. They lost their 3 children for good. Their eldest daughter and her 2 brothers were immediately put up for adoption. Why the rush? The reason behind it is shocking. In England, the government sets adoption quotas to the local authorities responsible for child protection. Targets for each county on the number of children to be adopted. An obligation to achieve certain predefined results.
From the year 2000 onwards, all children's services authorities were told to increase adoption numbers wherever possible, do whatever they can. And there clearly are cases where social workers have fabricated evidence in order to get children adopted.
To give counties an incentive to reach their quotas, the Labour government designed a reward system. The more adoption numbers rose, the more the local authorities' budgets would grow, sometimes by several £million.
They could have a target for recycling waste, for instance, and if they get more waste recycling, then they get a reward. Similarly, there's a target for recycling children from one family to another.
Since 2008, the system has gotten worse. If the counties don't reach their targets, they actually lose money. It is this terrifying logic put in place by the government that Colin and Claire fell victim to. Their first court hearing is this Monday, and they will appear without legal representation. Ian Josephs, the wealthy Good Samaritan who assists families who've been unjustly accused, advised them the day before.
They don't sound as though they're very rich people. They're in a lower income group, certainly, I would think. Claire has occasional fits of epilepsy, but they're very rare now because she takes medicine. There's no evidence that Claire or Colin are going to hurt their baby. There's no evidence that they have any intention of hurting their baby.
For several hours, Colin and Claire tried to convince the judges that they could be good parents.
I looked at them with a smile on my face. I answered every question with a defence. I even acted in a professional manner of shaking everybody's hand. It's all been a look on the social worker's face. The judge's look sort of entails that he knows what we're on about. He knows that we're in the right.
We asked for a supervision order, say if the judge decides to let us have one, we might get our daughter back.
If it does go ahead, we will have our daughter in our own place, 24/7, but the social workers will come round every day to check on us. But when they leave, we keep our daughter there.
Colin and Claire still have hope. What they do not know is that the process is rushed, which is what Nikki and Mark discovered on the day of their hearing.
Family courts are all about just sitting there and allowing people to slag you off and tell you the worst parts of your life. I had a theft and I did have an actual bodily harm. I was 14 and the person was 15. We had a fight and I hit him once.
And he stole a bubblegum machine.
I stole a bubblegum machine, yeah.
Yeah.
It was all put on, you're the bad person because you had a bad childhood.
And the fact that you was in care yourself.
That was a big point, that I'd been put in care myself. That, still to this day, there's a lot of people that think children taken are taken from people who have been in care themselves.
We in the family courts have to look into the future all the time. We have to see what's happened in the past, but that for us is only a guide to what is likely to happen in the future. We must look at the past, but only insofar as it is a guide to the future.
Not everything would be decided in advance. The next day, Colin and Claire are summoned for their last day of hearings. This time, it will be the social worker's turn to speak. In the late afternoon, the verdict falls.
We've lost her. They took her all away. They said that we can't take care of her and we just can't take care of her emotional needs, and they took her for adoption. They took our baby. They stole our baby for nothing. I'm not giving up on her. I'm not at all. I'm not giving up on our little girl. I'm going to find her and I'm going to make sure she knows that we love her. Screw what they say. I'm going to find her. I'm going to find her through these adoption agencies, and as soon as she's old enough, I'm going to keep these reports and show her that we were there for her and don't take notice of this and try and get back in her life. Be there for her, no matter what, no matter if she's angry at us or what. I will. If it's the last thing I ever do on this earth, I will.
Colin and Claire's baby is now going to feature in an advert to charm her future parents. In England, children who are up for adoption are exposed publicly and have their faces shown in catalogues and on websites. We have blotted them out.
Lainey is 3 years old and I've looked after her for 13 months. Lainey is fun, loving. She just deserves to be in a happy, settled home with a loving family.
Horrified to see it on video, let alone on
Yeah.
so I just think it's disgusting.
12 years ago, when they were adopted, Nikki and Mark's 3 children also featured in a short promotional video.
We were given a VHS tape that the social worker said that we might want as a memento. They'd used it to show to prospective adopters, to advertise them, to see if anyone would like to take them.
You can imagine Tesco advertising the baked beans. Well, this was them advertising our children.
In Cambridgeshire, Colin and Claire's baby was also displayed on the shelves of this strange supermarket. We pretended to be prospective parents at the agency that got her adopted.
Yes, I know them.
The social workers there use methods similar to those used in pet stores.
So you can see, you know, he's an adorable little baby, but he's got muscular dystrophy, which is
I understand.
a degenerative. Not many people, again, would want that risk. Lots of groups of 3. They're probably happy, healthy children, but there's 3 of them. People that would take 3 children are really hard to find. Those children will be on the internet as well. There's a lot of sort of black African children. There's not enough black African adopters, and that's another reason why they might put them on the internet. Yeah. And from a catalogue, you can't get away from it. You know, that is a bit what it's like.
And what do you think of that?
It's not nice, but it's necessary. It does work. It means a child may wait 3 months instead of 3 years, you know, for the right family. It speeds things up, it's much quicker.
In just a few months, the agency found new parents for Colin and Claire's white and healthy baby.
For social workers then to have imposed on them targets for the number of children to be adopted then creates other problems. There are not adoptive parents for the older children in care, children with disabilities, children of different ethnicity. There are not queues of adoptive parents for those children. Where there are loads of adoptive parents, applicants are for babies, and for white babies, and for white babies with no disability. That's what they want.
In 2015, of the 7,740 children waiting to be adopted, less than 40% found new parents. Meanwhile, 70,000 children are still living with foster parents or in homes, at a cost of almost 2.8 billion euros for the taxpayer.
Foster parents are paid quite a significant sum of money for doing the job of fostering. Unlike adopters, when you take a child into your family as yours, you don't get paid for it. And so that is one reason why perhaps local authorities prefer adoption to fostering.
They'll save a lot of money if they take the child out of fostering, which goes on for years, and give them to adoptive parents, because once the child is adopted, the expense for the countries stops.
In November 2015, Prime Minister David Cameron put his foot down and demanded more adoptions. To get rid of all these children without parents, the government unscrupulously resorted to private agencies.
The very idea that the market is a positive force in terms of raising standards of children, I think, is very, very questionable, and it's not one there's a lot of evidence behind. Children have the right to know that there's a public awareness and accountability for their care. And the more that that's subcontracted out, that there's money involved, we know that money and children removed from their families is a recipe for disaster.
In the United Kingdom, adoption is an endless cycle of tragedy. The parents, unfairly separated from their children, are deprived of their parent status for life. Adoption is irrevocable. Mistakes made are irreparable. With the Children Act, the UK has found a way to erase the biological parents. How can life go on with the memory of the children you have lost, whose names you are not allowed to say out loud, and whose faces you cannot show? Jackie and John are still clinging on to a glimmer of hope that they will see their two boys again one day, the ones they lost over a single bump on the head, to find them as adults and to teach them about their family history.
We've started this book for the boys. The boys have each got one. It's a book of genealogy. This book is here for the boys to learn and understand where they come from, what the history is. It's photographs and it's stories. It explains what they know, how their name came, what our surnames mean, where the history, where our families have travelled around the world. It's a proper genealogy book. And because most of the time, because it's closed adoptions, the files are sealed and they can't get access to their own history.
And they'll only have one side of the story, the side that they were told by the adopter or social services, not the other side.
Piece by piece, Jackie and John put together a new version of their story, which was fabricated by social services. After losing her two children, Jackie decided to study family law. She also created an association for the victims of social services. Thanks to this network and to her new skills, she found out that her child abuse record was a forgery. The first piece of the file fell on the first day of the first hearing where the decision was made to remove her boys.
There's a break in the proceedings and we go outside and we sit down with our solicitors. And my solicitor says to me, "Do you know about this document?"
A pregnancy medical report from Jackie's first child showed that Jackie was in poor health with a long medical record. The doctor didn't believe this. She concluded that Jackie was fabricating illnesses and expressed concerns about the future well-being of her baby.
What transpires is that she left that meeting in 2005, went back to her office, drafted a letter to social services, and stated that I had this condition.
Following her first pregnancy, social services continued to observe Jackie. 3 years later, when taking her second child to hospital regarding the bump, she was immediately accused by social services of causing serious harm to her child. She has discovered since then that this was a false allegation.
I then made an application to the hospital where all the events unfolded. And as a result of that, the hospital sent me forms. And they sent me some documents that were part of the investigation that hadn't been shown to us before at all during the care proceedings. The medical paperwork from the hospital states that my son never ever had any injury. The social services saying that my son had a skull fracture. And the court said my son had a skull fracture. But the medical report that was withheld from the court states that my son never had a skull fracture.
The problem is the judges don't accept that people need independent assessments. The judges believe that it is acceptable to rely on the assessments from the local authority when the local authority is under pressure to get children adopted. That's clearly wrong. That clearly is not a fair trial.
The first thing the judge said in a family decision case on whether adoption is considered is the words that was used were, "This court does not have a duty to strain." In other words, the court doesn't have to go to any limits to try and find the truth in family law if there's an allegation of abuse. They don't have to make an effort.
If the judges had really wanted to, they could have found evidence to prove Jackie's innocence. 2 years ago, she discovered that she suffered from a genetic illness that can be transmitted to one's children, an illness that provokes bruises or bumps at the slightest impact.
We actually asked the geneticist that specific question, that if Jackie has got it, could the boys have it? And if I remember right, she said yes. There's a 50-50% chance that yes, they will have it. And obviously there's no ways we could get them checked for it, but it's a case of it just, everything, other things also clicked into place. So it would explain a lot.
Today, Jackie and John cling to the hope of proving that their child was ill in order to get their 2 boys back. In a few months' time, the court may agree to study the evidence that Jackie found herself. Mark and Nikki have given up the hope of getting their children back. They have started a new family. Brandon was born 10 years ago, 1 year after his 3 siblings were adopted. The little boy came through a storm that raged for over a year.
When I discovered that I was expecting Brandon, it was a mixture of being horrified, uncertain. I kind of kept it to myself for about 5 months. I couldn't keep it to myself for much longer because it was beginning to show.
We were not going to lose a 4th. There was no way. We were going to do anything possible to keep this child.
Social services threatened with suspicions of likely future harm. They threatened to take Nikki and Mark's baby away from them at birth. 2 weeks before the due date, the couple fled to Ireland to escape British law.
When we arrived at the hospital in Wexford, Ireland, we told them why we were there. We were honest. We said we were there to have our baby, who would have been taken at birth if we'd have had him in this country. We then had 2 police women at the bottom of the bed. I had the hospital administrator beside me, practically reading me my rights, telling me that I wasn't allowed to leave the hospital. If I did, it would be without my baby. And then the following morning, not long after I'd given birth, Norfolk Social Services social workers arrived.
The fact that Norfolk Social Services had actually chased us over there, you could see that they were trying to scam us to go back and take the child.
Nikki and Mark realized they had an opportunity here. Suspected harm does not apply in Ireland. The English judicial system could not place their baby under guardianship or gag the media on the pretext of protecting a minor. For once, British journalists were able to report on the case.
If you produced your programme in England, you would go to jail. And I'm sure you don't want to do that, and obviously many journalists in England don't want to do that. So they cannot go into the same detail about individual cases as you can.
The media soon took up the cause and stirred the entire country. Mark and Nikki were now in a position to negotiate with social services. They would agree to return to England only if they were given a fair chance. In June 2006, they returned home. They obtained the right to be put on probation in a center where families suspected of abuse are locked up.
When I first moved in there, it was like a prison because you are locked in. There's cameras in the communal areas and there's a speaker system that they use in your apartment so that they can hear absolutely everything that gets said or done. So if they hear a child cry out suddenly, they can go rushing through to see what the problem is.
The prisoners decided to beat the surveillance system at its own game. To prove they were not making any mistakes, they recorded and described their daily life on camera.
I think it's a case of they put you in that house to build you to fail, so they don't care what you're doing.
After 5 months, Nikki and Mark left this awful place. They had given social services no reason to steal Brandon from them.
We came home with Brandon in the October of 2006, having done 5 months assessment. So we had regular visits from children's services. To start with, it was every day, very intrusive. But slowly, over time, it then sort of goes down to like 3 times a week and then 2 times a week.
During that period, the family is still faced with the threat of social services. Nikki and Mark would have to wait 5 months to know if they could keep Brandon permanently. On the 26th of June 2007, they were finally free. The 13-month-long nightmare had ended at last.
What does today mean to you to have Brandon with you finally?
It means so much to have him with us and to stay with us.
Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Good luck to you. Thank you very much.
Why did the court finally allow Mark and Nikki to be parents? Because it didn't have a choice. A few months earlier, Nikki received the results of a forensic counter-examination carried out by an eminent American pediatrician. The doctor made a decisive discovery. Social services had wrongly accused Mark and Nikki of abuse. Their son was not severely beaten. His fractures were caused by scurvy.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
It's nice to finally put a face to the name. How long did it take you to make the diagnosis of scurvy?
I think it took, I worked on it probably on and off for probably a week, doing research and extracting the records, looking at x-rays. And, it just hits you. So here's a child with a food aversion, the wrong diet, losing weight, and then these symptoms. Well, yes, it's classic scurvy. The criteria that they use when it comes to bones and bone fractures are flawed. There is none that shows any cause and effect scientifically rigorous between these fractures and child abuse.
Just before the children were removed, Nikki and Mark had spoken to social services about the food allergies that had caused their son's scurvy.
We suggested it as a possibility. Our son's diet could have been responsible, and that's something else that we raised with them.
Mark and Nikki's first 3 children were taken and then adopted because of a false diagnosis. The justice system would not be able to avoid a retrial, which would find Mark and Nikki to be innocent. Nevertheless, Judge Wilson made the decision that they would never get their children back.
We had to say to ourselves, now, here's a possible grave injustice to Mr. and Mrs. Webster. But our focus must be on these children now. And if we focus on the needs of these children now and their belief that this is what is often called their forever family, and that that lady is their mum, and that that man is their dad, to pull them all out of that and give them back to the Websters, whom they hadn't seen for 4 years, it's too much to ask of these children in psychological terms.
They actually call it a miscarriage of justice, which basically means something's been done wrong, but oops, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. You lose your children.
And it is a shame that there can be nothing done to rectify it. The only way to do that would be to change the law on adoption in the UK, which I can't see them doing that anytime soon.
1 month after the trial, Nikki gave birth to a little girl, Cara. The only one of the 5 siblings not to have been persecuted by social services.
My sister is 16, and my 2 brothers, I can't remember their age. Mummy knows. Maybe when I see them, I can give them a hug and then we can play some games.
Cara might get to meet her sister and her 2 big brothers one day, but only once they become adults. If they have any memories of their parents, if they manage to find their trace, if they want to find them. In England, the child protection law does not give the families it has destroyed a fighting chance, except when they escape it. Bethany's baby was born 5 weeks after her exile to France. As soon as Louis was born, social services came knocking on his grandparents' door.
Just left Bethany over there, and then I came back to England, and then it was knock, 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 knock at the door, social services. Social services, where is Bethany? Where's the baby? And I said, they're not here, they're not here. I said she'd moved abroad.
By leaving their hunting ground, Bethany escaped the harm that social services could have caused. She was able to negotiate her return to England without losing her baby.
It was the best idea ever, fleeing to France to have my baby. Otherwise, I would not have had my son. He would have been taken at birth.
For 2 months, social services put the young mother to the test. They found that the person they had suspected of future child abuse was actually a good mother.
I wanted a chance to be a mother. I've never had kids before. How can they decide that I'm a bad person on future harm, on future risk? I would never hurt my son.
There are a very, very, very few parents who should not have care of their children. But generally, in order to find out about the level of injustice that might be being perpetrated, we really need to listen now to parents, not in 20 years' time, not when the children have grown up and come and say, why did this happen to me?
Today, more than 2 million children are listed in the records of social services.
This sort of machine crunching up families and recycling children continues to run on insanely as it does without being properly addressed. People in other countries don't believe that this is happening in England.